Today I would like to invite you to listen to the Dhammapada of the Buddha Sakyamuni, the 185-foot verses from the Buddhist scriptures on the YouTube channel Thien Thai in the USA. In the gentle light of the Dhamma, the words of the Blessed One arise like a calm river flowing without disturbance, guiding beings away from confusion and suffering toward clarity, peace, and liberation. The teaching of the Buddha is not merely words to be heard, but a path to be lived, a transformation of mind, and a deep purification of intention and conduct. When we listen to the Dhammapada, we are invited to reflect upon the nature of our speech, our actions, our food, our dwelling, and our inner aspiration. These are not separate practices, but one unified path of awakening. The verse of the Buddha speaks softly yet deeply, saying that one who does not insult others, one who does not harm living beings, one who maintains restraint according to the fundamental moral code, one who practices moderation in food, one who dwells in seclusion, and one who directs the mind toward higher thoughts. Such a person is following the true teaching of all Buddhas. This is not a teaching of external ritual alone, but of inner discipline, where every moment becomes an opportunity to cultivate compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom. In ancient times, during the blessed era of the Buddha, there was a story of monks who lived near the city of Savatthi. These monks were newly ordained and still carried habits from their lay life. Some spoke harshly without awareness, some ate without moderation, some wandered into worldly conversations, and some lived without true restraint. Observing this, the Blessed One did not rebuke them with anger. Instead, he gathered them and taught with great compassion. The Buddha explained that speech is a powerful force. Words can either heal or harm. When a person speaks without mindfulness, even a single sentence can create pain that lasts long in the hearts of others. But when speech is restrained and rooted in kindness, it becomes a blessing that spreads peace. Thus, not insulting others is not merely silence, but the cultivation of gentle and truthful speech that uplifts rather than destroys. In the same way, the Buddha taught about non-harming. Every being, whether small or great, fears pain and desires safety. To refrain from harming is to recognize the shared nature of life. A monk who walks in awareness does not lift his hand in violence, nor does he cultivate thoughts of hatred. Instead, he sees all beings as companions in the vast journey of existence, bound by karma and seeking freedom. There was also a disciple who once struggled deeply with anger. Before entering the monastic life, he had been a soldier, trained in battle and accustomed to conflict. Even after ordination, his mind would sometimes return to old habits of aggression. The Buddha, knowing this, guided him gently. He taught him to observe the breath, to reflect on impermanence, and to understand that anger burns the one who holds it more than the one it is directed toward. Slowly, through practice, the disciple's mind softened, and he began to understand the truth of non-harming not as a rule, but as liberation from suffering itself. Moderation in food is also part of this sacred path. The Buddha did not encourage indulgence, nor did he promote extreme deprivation. Instead, he taught balance. Food is taken not for pleasure, nor for pride, but for sustaining the body so that the practice of Dhamma may continue. When one eats with awareness, gratitude arises. When one eats with mindfulness, craving diminishes. In the monastery, monks would reflect before eating, understanding that every morsel is a support for practice, not a source of attachment. There is a true story of a monk who once became attached to flavors. He began to look forward eagerly to meals and lost his mindfulness during eating. The Buddha, seeing this tendency, gently reminded him that attachment even to simple food can cloud the clarity of the mind. Hearing this, the monk reflected deeply and began to practice restraint. Over time, food became for him only nourishment, and his mind grew lighter, more peaceful, and more focused on higher contemplation. Secluded abode is also praised in this teaching. This does not only mean physical isolation, but the creation of inner space free from distraction. A secluded place allows the mind to settle, to observe itself, and to turn inward without disturbance. Many disciples of the Buddha would retreat to forests, mountains, and quiet dwellings to deepen their meditation. In silence, They discovered the nature of arising and passing phenomena, and in that discovery, they found freedom. There was a monk who once lived in a crowded village monastery. His mind was constantly disturbed by noise, conversation, and activity. Although he tried to meditate, he could not find stillness. Upon seeking guidance, the Buddha advised him to dwell in a quiet forest hermitage. There, surrounded by natural stillness, he began to observe his mind more clearly. Gradually, distractions faded, and he experienced deep insight into impermanence and non-self. Intent on higher thoughts is the culmination of this path. It means directing the mind toward wisdom, compassion, and liberation. Instead of being trapped in ordinary concerns, the practitioner turns attention toward what is noble and profound. Thoughts of kindness replace thoughts of hatred. Thoughts of generosity replace thoughts of greed. Thoughts of understanding replace thoughts of ignorance. In this way, the mind becomes uplifted and purified. The Buddha taught that the mind is the forerunner of all states. If the mind is pure, speech and action naturally become pure. If the mind is confused, suffering follows. Therefore, cultivating higher thoughts is not optional, but essential for liberation. Thus, the Dhammapada verse gently reveals the heart of the Buddha's teaching. It is a path of restraint, compassion, mindfulness, balance, solitude, and wisdom. It is a way of living that transforms ordinary existence in a sacred practice. There is a profound example preserved in the tradition of how the Buddha guided monks who were living without sufficient discipline. At one time, a group of monks residing in a monastic settlement began to grow careless in their conduct. Their speech became loose, their behavior unguarded, and their mindfulness weakened. They would speak in ways that disturbed harmony. They would seek food without reflection. And they would engage in unnecessary conversations that scattered the mind. Although they had left household life, the habits of worldly existence still lingered deeply within them. The Buddha, perceiving this condition, approached them not with anger, but with deep compassion. He gathered them and pointed out that the purpose of monastic life is not merely to change outer appearance, but to refine the inner nature. He reminded them that the training of restraint is the foundation upon which liberation is built. Without restraint, the mind remains outwardly driven, constantly pulled by desire, irritation, and distraction. With restraint, however, the mind becomes like a still lake, capable of reflecting reality clearly without distortion. In that gathering, the Buddha emphasized that discipline is not oppression but protection. When a practitioner refrains from insulting others, he protects himself from the consequences of harmful speech. When a practitioner refrains from harming living beings, he protects his heart from cruelty and remorse. When one practices moderation in eating, the body remains light and the mind becomes alert. When one chooses solitude appropriately, the senses are not overwhelmed by constant stimulation. When one directs thought toward higher understanding, the mind rises above confusion and becomes inclined toward liberation. Among those monks, there was one who struggled especially with speech. He often spoke without awareness, sometimes interrupting others, sometimes speaking harshly, sometimes speaking without purpose. Because of this, harmony within the community was disturbed. The Buddha called him aside and gently asked him to observe the consequences of his words. He was instructed to remain silent for periods of time, not as punishment, but as training. Through silence, he began to see how often speech arises from impulse rather than wisdom. Over time, he learned that silence itself can be a form of compassion, allowing others peace and allowing the mind to settle. Another monk in the same community struggled with eating habits. He had not fully understood the principle of moderation. Even after leaving worldly life, he continued to approach food with craving, selecting portions greedily and thinking constantly about taste. The Buddha instructed him to reflect carefully before every meal, to consider the nature of food as temporary nourishment rather than a source of pleasure. He was taught to observe how the body depends on food but does not own it, and how craving for taste only strengthens attachment. Through this reflection, his relationship with food slowly transformed. Eating became an act of mindfulness rather than desire. There was also a monk who found it difficult to remain in solitude. He preferred the company of others and felt uneasy when alone. Yet solitude is a vital condition for deep understanding. Without stepping away from constant interaction, the mind remains outward-facing and cannot observe itself clearly. The Buddha advised him to spend time in a quiet, dwelling away from distraction. At first, he felt discomfort and restlessness, but gradually he began to notice the movements of his own thoughts. In that observation, he discovered that much of his anxiety came not from the world outside, but from the untrained patterns within his own mind. As these monks continued their practice, they slowly understood that the teaching was not a set of external rules imposed upon them, but a map for inner liberation. The restraint taught by the Buddha was not meant to limit life, but to free it from unnecessary suffering. Each guideline pointed toward a deeper freedom, a freedom from compulsion, from unconscious reaction, and from the cycles of craving and aversion. In reflecting upon this teaching, one begins to see how the path unfolds naturally. When speech is purified, relationships become harmonious. When harm is abandoned, fear diminishes in oneself and others. When food is taken with awareness, the body becomes a stable foundation for meditation. When solitude is embraced appropriately, insight arises without distraction. When higher thoughts are cultivated, the entire direction of life shifts toward awakening. The ancient commentary traditions preserve many reflections on how the Buddha repeatedly guided monks back to this core understanding. He did not teach complexity for its own sake, but simplicity that leads to clarity. The essence of his message was always the same: purify conduct, purify awareness, purify intention. When these three are aligned, suffering naturally begins to dissolve. One particular episode recounts how the Buddha addressed monks who were arguing over minor matters of discipline. Their minds had become entangled in dispute, forgetting the greater purpose of their practice. The Buddha called them together and reminded them that quarrels arise when mindfulness is lost. He pointed out that attachment to opinions, even about discipline itself, can become a source of suffering. The true purpose of discipline is not to win arguments, but to calm the mind and cultivate wisdom. Hearing this, the monks became quiet. Slowly, they returned to a simpler way of living, focusing again on personal restraint rather than external comparison. In this return to simplicity, harmony was restored. The deeper meaning of this teaching is that liberation is not found in outward achievement, but in inward purification. A person may speak many words about truth, but if those words are mixed with harm or pride, they do not lead to awakening. A person may follow many practices, but if they are driven by craving, they do not bring freedom. Thus, the guidance of the Buddha continues to resonate beyond time. It speaks to the condition of every mind that struggles with distraction, anger, craving, and confusion. It gently points toward a life of restraint that is not restrictive, but deeply peaceful. It reveals that true nobility is found not in external status, but in inner refinement. In this way, the teaching of discipline, moderation, solitude, and higher thought becomes a living practice that transforms ordinary existence into a path of awakening, leading beings gradually away from suffering and toward clarity, compassion, and liberation. In the final reflection of this teaching, the essence of the Dhamma reveals itself as simple, direct, and profound. The path shown by the Buddha is not distant or unreachable, but present in every moment where awareness is cultivated. When one refrains from insulting others, the heart becomes free from hostility. When one refrains from harming living beings, compassion naturally arises without effort. When one practices restraint according to the fundamental moral code, life becomes orderly and peaceful. When one observes moderation in food, the body becomes light and suitable for practice. When one dwells in seclusion, the mind has space to settle and understand itself clearly. When one directs thoughts toward higher understanding, wisdom gradually replaces confusion, and the path toward liberation becomes steady and clear. All these qualities are not separate attainments, but expressions of a single purified mind. Each aspect of conduct is a step away from suffering and a step toward clarity. In practicing them, one discovers that peace is not something created externally, but revealed internally when defilements are gently released. Thus, the teaching of all Buddhas is complete in this way. It does not require elaborate explanation beyond its essence. It asks only for sincerity, awareness, and continuous practice. When these are present, the mind naturally inclines toward awakening, just as a river naturally flows toward the ocean. May this understanding settle deeply in the hearts of all beings, guiding them beyond confusion, beyond suffering, and into the quiet freedom of awakened awareness. Nama Amitabha bless to all. I hope to bring this merit towards all disciples and sentient beings, all of whom will attain Buddhahood. Please click like, share, and subscribe to help me grow my YouTube channel. Thanks you for watching my video.